cousin falsely accused me of SA. Now my family is finally contacting me after almost 10 years. I grew up in what was probably the most normal of normal households. My parents worked a lot, but still managed to care for me and my 3 older sisters. We were never super close as a family, but we never had any issues either. The same goes for my extended family. They always lived a few hours away, but we saw each other during summer holidays or Christmas and always got along great. However, as we got older, we naturally grew apart as everyone had their own lives. I'm 31 now. In 2014, when I was 22 and attending university, I got a phone call from my mother that turned my life upside down. I remember not answering at first because I was gaming with friends, but she called again immediately after the first call. This was an unwritten rule in the family. If you call twice like that, it's important, like someone died important. So, when she called again, I excused myself and answered, only to hear chaos on the other end, like people were arguing. When my mom realized I had answered, it sounded like she went to another room and closed the door. I just asked what was going on and I heard she was crying. My memory of this conversation is a bit blurry, but she basically asked me if I had something to confess to regarding E. E is my cousin on my mom's side and is 7 years younger than me, 15 at the time. At that point, I hadn't even seen E for several years. I just said no and asked what this was about. She cried even harder and started accusing me of assaulting E back when we were children. E had told everything to my sister, who then told my mother and my aunt. E claimed that back when she was 9 and I was 16, she had been playing in my room when I came in and started feeling her under her clothes and kissing her. My mother screamed at me to say something, but I couldn't even speak. It was all so absurd. I remember thinking this must be some bad joke. The last thing I remember saying was that it wasn't true and that he was lying. But then my mom went on about how he gave such a detailed description of where and how. She kept asking, "Did you do this? Did you do this?" And I just screamed back at her, "No," each time. It all ended with my mom putting me on speaker and both my mom and dad saying that they didn't want anything to do with me and never to contact them again. 2 of my sisters texted me later that day, pretty much saying that I'm disgusting, and then blocked me. I know it's weird, but after that call, I want to have a long shower. To this day, I still don't know why I did that. After calming down, I started calling and texting everyone, even E. No one answered, and those who hadn't blocked my number by then quickly did so. The only thing I heard back was from my father, who texted me to stop contacting them and that they needed to heal. That was 9 years ago, and I haven't spoken to anyone in my family since that day. To say this messed me up is an understatement. I was living in a haze for weeks after that, and it didn't help that this was right before I was supposed to defend my bachelor's thesis and was already stressed out. Luckily, my co-writer sensed something was up and saved me by controlling the conversation so that I got the easy parts. Without him, I'm sure I would have failed. Needless to say, no one came to my graduation. Then started the worst period of my life. I spent the first year expecting the cops to knock on my door and arrest me for sexual abuse. I didn't land any jobs, just living off my saved money. I drank a lot and did oxy. I also grew resentful and violent. The only reason I didn't hurt anyone is because no one was around. My neighbor called the cops on me once after I had smashed a glass, but I managed to convince the officers that I had just dropped it, and they went away since there were no others inside my apartment. Instead of sleeping, I spent my nights planning how I could hurt E and make sure no one ever found out. Even thinking about how I could actually do the things she'd accused me of, but much worse. I know, I'm not proud of that. I landed my first real job in my field in late 2015. Only then did things start to improve. I focused all my time on my job as it gave me something normal to do. Recovery was a slow process, but I drank less and smiled more. I lived cheaply and earned good money, so I made a point of buying myself a nice gift for my birthdays, a VR headset, a motorcycle, Lego, etc. And last year, I moved from my shitty apartment and bought a small house. It was an old dream of mine to have my own garage and a garden to care for. This has boosted me even more. So, my life is okay now. I still have problems. I've been on antidepressants for the last few years, and while they help, it's not in a happy way. They simply remove the dark thoughts and replace them with dead ones. My trust in other people is close to non-existent. I've tried dating but only been on 2 dates with 2 different women. It's really hard to speak like a normal person when it comes down to it. And what would I tell a potential partner when she asked about my family? Oh, they accused me of a heinous crime, and we're not talking anymore. But I didn't do it, I swear. My field is very male-dominated, so the only woman I really speak to is my therapist, who I like a lot. A few days ago, I received a text from my mother. It felt unreal, and I was scared to open it at first, so I just stared at the notification for hours before opening it. Yesterday, a second text followed. Translated, they basically say, "Hi, my name. It's been so long since we talked. We miss you and want to know how you're doing." Here she writes a long text about my sisters and how my nieces and nephews are getting big. I didn't even know I was an uncle. Know that we love you and always will. Love, Mom and Dad. The second text said, "Hi, my name. We understand if you don't want to talk to us after what happened, but please listen. Last month, the subject of you was brought up at a family gathering. During this, he was downplaying everything that had happened to her. It got so awkward that she finally admitted that nothing happened and that she probably just dreamt it. We were all appalled by this. When we last spoke, we wanted to protect E and did the only thing we thought we could do. We know that's not excusing how you were treated. What he did was wrong, and we're all angry at her. We have called everyone that knew and told them the truth. We all want to speak with you, and your sisters want you to meet their families. Please write back if you can find it in you to forgive us. Love, Mom and Dad." So yeah, that's my situation right now. I haven't answered, but they no doubt know I've seen it. Truth be told, I'm seething. So many old, shitty memories are now stirring again. I don't want to forgive them, and I wouldn't trust myself to be in the same room as them right now. Part of me wants to call my family and unleash everything on them, to guilt them with everything I went through until they all hit their rock bottom. Then dedicate my life to making my cousin's life as miserable as possible. The other part wants to ignore them and continue with my okay-ish life, with my motorcycle and my garden to keep me company. I don't have any friends. The only people I speak to are my coworkers, but we're not really close. I've called my therapist's clinic, but they told me she's on vacation and won't be available for weeks, and I don't want anyone else but her. So that leaves internet strangers. So please, where do I go from here? Do I ignore them and continue as is? Or do I answer? And if so, what do I even write? I'm pretty sure meeting them in person would be a bad idea for the foreseeable future, but I'm not even sure how my life can improve from picking up those old threads. As embarrassing as it may sound, I've dreamed about the day when they apologized, imagining them throwing themselves to the ground and kissing my feet. Texting seems so anticlimactic now. Cousin falsely accused me of SA. Now my family is contacting me after almost 10 years. Part 2. It's been around 3 months since I last posted, and a decent amount has happened. Some for the better, and some for the worse. For one, he is still a huge problem. Around a week after my family sent me the messages, she also reached out with a huge apology text. When I received it, I couldn't believe my eyes. She was talking about how she had mental problems and has been dealing with them for ages, almost as an excuse as to why she did this to me. She said she needed help, and her parents were helping her get it. This seemed like BS to me because all my life I knew E. She was a beaming, radiant girl until that dreadful day in 2014. The whole text felt like she was just feeding me excuses as to why it happened, and then ending it off with the shortest actual apology. My original plan was to go on with my life and try to slowly make it better and better, but seeing this pushed me to my breaking point. I knew I had to do something. I had to put her in her place because I couldn't just let it be. At this point, I texted my family to set up a meeting between us at my house. They tried to convince me to meet at their house, but there was no chance I was stepping foot in that place ever again. They accepted the offer. When they arrived at my house, we did the basic, awkward hugs. It felt strange to have people in my house as I hadn't had guests for almost 5 years now. They walked in, looked around, and got seated. We did basic catch-ups and just talked about how our lives have been. After around 10 minutes of chit-chat, I knew it was time. I spoke about the text my cousin sent me and how it annoyed me. They were very accepting of my feelings and said they understood. I couldn't take it anymore and just let it all out. I screamed. I cursed. I probably said things I shouldn't have, but I felt I needed to do so. They were in complete silence as I went on for probably 15 minutes straight, only breathing when I had to. By the end of it, I was exhausted, but they all apologized and tried to make things right with me. It wasn't everything I wanted, but it was a start, and it showed that they were truly sorry. However, my father had this weird smile on his face that I couldn't get out of my mind. In the following weeks, my family tried to be more involved in my life. They even helped me repair the garden and a little bit in the house. I knew I couldn't fully forgive them for what they did, but seeing them try was enough for me to be somewhat accepting of them. But this didn't change the fact that I was still thinking of a way to hurt E. I couldn't let it go. I asked my mom if we could set up a meeting with E, to which she said that he was currently in a psych ward and probably wouldn't be released for a few months. This came as a shock to me because she never mentioned this in her texts. I didn't let it faze me too much as I knew I had to meet her one day. My mom then left my house to go back to hers, but my dad stayed. This wasn't too strange to me as he lived much closer to my house than my mom. He walked into the living room and got seated while I was in the kitchen cleaning up a bit. When I walked in, he was still seated and staring at the floor. I asked him what was up, and he simply said, "I believe you now, you know?" This was probably the most out-of-pocket thing he could have said to me. I sat beside him and asked what he meant, to which he said, "We didn't believe you when you said it was a lie. We just knew it would be easier for you to think we did." I couldn't believe it. All this time, I believed that at least my dad had trusted me, but even he didn't. My whole world shattered. At this point, I was just as bad, if not worse, than when the situation originally happened. I didn't want to speak to anyone. I was contemplating even going to work anymore. Every day, my dad would text me an apology, but I wouldn't even read it. I just couldn't face the fact that even he, my father, didn't trust me all these years. He was the one I thought would always have my back, but this situation was just too much for me. The days went by in a blur. I knew I needed to get out of this funk and back into the world, but it seemed almost impossible. I reached out to my therapist once again and had some long sessions with her. She helped me understand my feelings and how I could overcome them. It was a slow and painful process, but I felt I was making progress. One day, I decided to finally confront my father and just lay it all out once more. He arrived at my house and we had a long, tearful conversation. I told him how his words had hurt me more than he could imagine, and he apologized profusely, saying he had been misled by my mother and the whole situation. We agreed to slowly try to rebuild our relationship, but I knew it would take time. As for E, I decided to wait until she was out of the psych ward to confront her. I needed to get my own life back on track before dealing with her. My family was still a work in progress, and it would take a lot for me to fully trust them again, but at least we were moving in the right direction.